So everybody, welcome to our Daylesford Discusses, our online version. Thank you all very much for joining us. And tonight we are going to be talking about craft, the maker and sustainability. So it's been a very interesting time for craft. We've seen an enormous resurgence in interest in it, but we've also seen that it's a challenging and very fluid time for makers as well. And we have two amazing makers of beautiful craft, art really, and we want to also just see how, well, particularly for me, the idea of beauty and sustainability and longevity finds a sort of natural expression in craft in many ways, and also in terms of the home and mental health within the home, which I also think, and I think I'm going to get some support from Rita on this, is linked deeply to beauty. So there's a lot to discuss. And before I hand you over to our panelists to introduce themselves, I think another thing that is worth considering is when we talk about sustainability, and as the nutrition consultant to Daylesford, we're often talking about the soil, we're talking about food, but when it comes to, and we talk about climate change, and sometimes that conversation can be a little dark, frankly, and yet we very rarely, in all the talk about what we need to change and what we need to give up to be sustainable, we don't often talk about what we might have lost that is coming back. And so one of the things that I love about tonight is we're going to talk about the sort of beauty that can come back into our lives and the sort of Zen flow that you can get from making things that are both useful and beautiful. And so we have a whole hour to explore just how wonderful sustainability could be for us. But before we go any further, what I'd like to do is just introduce you to our panel. So what I'll do is I'll mention your names, my lovely panelists, and if you would just like to introduce yourself and tell our guests a little bit about yourself. So could we begin with you, Malika?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Malika Bing. I'm editor of Crafts magazine. So obviously craft is something I'm very deeply immersed in day to day, but it's also a big passion of mine. And yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing it from many different sides and delving deeper into it with all of you.
And thank you. And Rita?
Hi, I'm Rita Koenig. I'm an interior designer and I live in London, work here and in the States a lot. And sustainability is something that we work with quite a bit, sort of via the more unusual route of antiques, really is my most sustainable thing. But I'm very interested in the new rise in craft. It's been very interesting and fun to see. Actually, we use craft a lot now in our work.
Thank you. And B?
Hi, yeah, I'm Beatrice Larkin. I'm a woven textile designer. I'm usually based in Hackney and I design all my fabrics there, and I work with a mill in Lancashire to weave predominantly woolen fabrics, all inspired by my kind of inky line drawings and broken geometrics.
And finally, we have the very gifted Charlotte.
Hi, my name's Charlotte Kidger. I'm a material maker based in London. I specialise in working with a waste plastic. It's a very niche type of plastic collected from CNC factories in the UK. And I take this plastic and combine it with a binder to make sculptural and functional furniture and objects. And everything's handmade by myself in my studio, and everything's bespoke, completely unique because of the casting process.
Thank you. Yeah, it's extraordinary. So one of the joys of being online is if you haven't seen either Charlotte or Beatrice's work, you can quickly Google and see how extraordinary what they make is. But Rita, can I come to you first and talk about the home for a few minutes, because we're coming into what might be the most stay-at-home winter that Britain has perhaps faced since the Second World War. And making homes beautiful and giving space to breathe is something that you do for a living. How have you found COVID has affected you in terms of being at home, and has it changed the way that you think about interior space, or is that even a proper question, Rita?
I think, yes, I think that's a good question. And I think I don't think it's really changed the way I feel about my interior spaces, because I always, it was always the thing I considered and cared about and made sure was a place I wanted to be. But I think that it certainly has made people more conscious of their space at home and seen the importance of it. Whereas I think maybe before people thought this was frivolous or silly or, not so important. And I think it's become really important. And it's also, as you were saying earlier, very important to our well-being. And in fact, earlier today, I was talking to Julia Samuel, who's a grief therapist, about our environments and how it affects us and our mood and well-being. It is very important.
And I think, Rita, we're using our houses differently. I know in my case, I have been home a lot more with 2 adult children back in the house. And so anything that doesn't flow or work logistically well in my home really, really shows. And I'm sure I can't be the only one in that situation. Do you have?
Well, I think also there's this other point of people working from home.
Yes.
And while it sounds like the ideal to begin with, I mean, I've spent a lot of time working from home. I don't so much anymore, but I used to in the beginning of my career. And quite quickly you realize that you're not so much working from home, but living in your office. And I think that's less healthy. And I think it's quite important. I really was worried for I didn't have that many working from home, but one particularly was, and I knew that her desktop was sitting on her coffee table. It's not that fun, and I think that's was hard for people. And I think you need to make those spaces. You need spaces, that are one thing and the other in this lockdown. I think that's the thing, probably one of the things to really try and work out before the next lockdown, how you're going to work from home.
Yeah. And if you are inside a home that perhaps you feel you want to change, what do you think are some of the things that you could look at? Because we're clearly not going to be moving out and getting it gutted and redone.
No, well, one of the things I think is moving rearranging your furniture is quite an easy fix, and it's quite interesting. You can really change the feel. I think probably a big clear out is probably a good idea, so that you get rid of all that junk that you're tripping over, because you need a bit more space, just in terms of mental space and actual space. When there's junk, you sort of don't notice it when you're out all the time, but I think you do a lot more when you're in the house. And then lighting is good, and also rehanging pictures. I mean, I would say those are the things that are easy to do in a scenario like a lockdown, where you can't suddenly get the builders in and start redecorating.
And one of the things about moving furniture around, I know that you've got actually already some really fascinating videos up online, and one you go through, my partner has had a bit to do with design. One, you go through the process of setting out a room, moving the furniture on paper, which I think is a fantastic thing to think about doing before you spend a day lugging pieces of furniture to places where they don't fit.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have to say, if I was doing it in a lockdown, I would just find somebody with a bit of muscle and say, come on. I'm quite partial to just moving the furniture. In fact, I remember doing it when I was 7 months pregnant, waiting for the removal men to arrive on a job. And they were literally an hour late, because apparently they couldn't find a parking space, by which time Millie, my assistant, and I had moved all the furniture ourselves. So I'm quite impatient like that, and we're probably more likely to just but I do it on paper when we haven't got there yet. When we don't even have the furniture, is usually when I'm doing it on paper. But if there's furniture to move, I'm much more likely to just get on and move it.
Just give it a whirl and think about where the light is in your house, and think about the different activities. I know that I've now commandeered a corner of a table that is just my office. Nobody gets to move into this space. I don't have to reset myself up.
Yeah.
It's made a big difference to have a little enclave that's only mine.
I think that's simple. I think that's important for everyone. And actually, at the beginning of our lockdown last time, my mother came with us, and we were in our house in the north of England. And I did at the very start sort of allocate everybody a space that could be their study, that was theirs to not just working, but also I thought, God, if we're all going to be shut up here for 3 months, everybody's got to have a space that they can be in themselves and not endlessly be with everybody else, you know.
Yeah. And in terms of craft, because I've gone a bit off-piste here, but one of the things that I think is really marked about your style is that you often recommend things that you would easily hand on to grandchildren, and you use a lot of antique bed linen and things that have got a real patina and are meant to be used for generations, not disposable. You don't seem to be at all hooked into the fast fashion world.
No, I'm not anywhere at any point. And actually, I'm quite glad that I can hook it onto a sustainability, because I always just thought I was just really extravagant. But so I'm glad. And I don't throw that sort of stuff away. And in fact, a lot of the stuff that I've used has been handed on to me. So I buy antiques and I use things. I mean, actually, I was thinking while you were talking of North Farm, our house in County Durham, and decorating it. If I had to give a percentage of stuff that's been bought new, it's probably beds and curtains. But sofas have been reupholstered, the furniture's all old. I've either been given it, inherited it, or bought it and it's an antique. I very rarely buy newly produced furniture that's been made in India or China type of thing. So it is, and the thing is that all of that stuff lasts so much longer.
Absolutely.
And it's the same with my clothes. I'll buy good clothes and not throw them away. Rather than, I think the clothes are quite frightening too, just the endless shopping every weekend and throwing away. They're quite scary, those programs, Jamie Oliver's programs of waste and things.
Absolutely. And also if the fact that we've even got to interiors being disposable in terms of sustainability is quite frightening. There's something quite timeless about the way that you approach and talk about and decorate a room in a home, and it's very human focused, which is, I think, one of the things that thinking about craft and sustainability and beautiful workmanship brings back into our lives, is that things are human centered.
Well, I think that human centered thing also allows us to not have to change things the whole time. And when we're working with clients on how their house should be or how they live, what they have, you know, obviously we will buy new things too, but actually the real joy in a house is the things that belong to people, you know, the things that have come to them via various means. And often when I'm trying to work out with somebody the things that we want to keep and lose, and you think, God, that hideous, you know, picture or table or chair or whatever it is. And actually one has to be quite careful, not simply because you don't want to offend somebody, but it's very interesting how something can change in terms of being ugly or attractive when you know its backstory. You know, when somebody says to you, oh, well, this picture comes from here and it belonged to this person and I really love it because I grew up with it. The picture, while you're being told this story, changes. It's very like people, you know, you can meet somebody for the first time and think, my goodness, they're the ugliest person I've ever met in my life. And by the time you've sat and chatted them for an hour and they're incredibly funny or you've really enjoyed them or liked them, they change completely and become very attractive. And the same, the other, you know, things have I don't know, I find that quite interesting in people's possessions. And I think it's very important in their houses because it's what makes your house yours versus you've just got all the bits that, oh, that's from so and so. God, I really wanted that thing from there because it's what everyone else has got. You know, that doesn't make a great house.
It gives it more character, doesn't it? And I think
Yeah.
probably going back to what you were saying just before we move on, is if you have got something old that you're tripping over, maybe it can be useful somewhere else in the house if you think about how we live in houses. So what's interesting about the way that you talk is you talk about living in places rather than buy this thing. It's a very unconsumerist approach in some ways.
I think so. I mean, I'm not afraid to consume either. I don't want to sound too earnest, but because I really like going shopping and I love consuming. But yes, I think the decorating process and our homes are about living in them rather than standing at the door as if you're the photographer looking at the space and how nice it looks. I think it's very much a feeling, and I think that's sort of the drive, I suppose.
And I think that's probably a perfect time to move on to Charlotte. Thank you, Rita. I'll need you again for the questions to go on. And now I'd like to speak to Charlotte. Just now, in terms of sustainability, your work's so extraordinary because you are actually working with a really problematic material that had never even occurred to me existed. And yet it must be an enormous issue. And what you make from it is really very beautiful. I was reading a bit about you thinking, oh my God. So can you just explain in more detail where your work comes from?
Yeah, of course. So I studied material futures at Central St Martin's 2 years ago. So I graduated 2 years ago. And the course is centred around craft, sustainability and technology. And I've always been very interested in materials, very interested in like tactile things that I can touch and work with. And working in quite an experimental way and kind of doing the research through the making. So it's during that course that I decided to look into waste materials, particularly plastics. And I was in uni and kind of came across this, it's called polyurethane foam. So it's the same family to polystyrene, so people can kind of imagine what it is. And a lot of the architecture students were using it to make models. And in the process of turning these blocks of foam into 3D models, it created a dust. So I then kind of gathered that if this was happening inside university, it would be happening on a much larger scale within industry and larger manufacturing places. So I did some research and found a factory that allowed me to go and visit them and see their process and see the work that they produced, and then became aware of how much waste was coming out of the process that they offered. So as a byproduct, they create a dust. So I kind of saw that as a secondary raw material. I would never really, anything that's kind of material and tactile, I would never consider as waste. I'd always see an opportunity to do something with it. So obviously, as you mentioned, that you'd never considered the waste I work with to be something some people to be aware of. It's kind of shows an example.
Pieces of molded polystyrene in my life.
Exactly. So I think
my work considered what was left over from carving it.
Yeah, and I think my work's an example of kind of tapping into these hidden and unknown waste streams, and kind of through having a curiosity, it led me down this path that I never it wasn't intentional. It's just through curiosity and research. So then anyway, I take this dust and I combine it with hand-dyed resin. So I colour all of the resin myself. So, 2 years worth of experimenting to kind of get where I've got now. And now I have this extremely durable material that can be cast. So it's all cold casting. And what's quite nice about it is there's kind of freedom with colour and form. So I started off with a collection of tables and vessels, and then since then I've now done commissions for the likes of COS, Selfridges, Brown's Fashion, all kind of retail brands that are interested in working with waste materials, but then also having the potential to kind of customize as well. I think what's quite nice, kind of a lot of interior designers are quite interested in working with me at the moment, because they can offer this kind of customization to their clients so that they can kind of be involved as well, which is quite nice. Yeah, I think that rounds it up.
And I would really encourage people to come and have a look at what you're making. And so, has lockdown changed what you're doing very much? Doing a lot of beautiful commissions in retail spaces.
Yeah, it's been great. So yeah, I had the big commission with Browns Fashion. So I had a display of 19 sculptures up in central London. And then it's not really changed. It's kind of changed slightly. I've had been quite interested in looking at my the demographic, that kind of the interest of people that follow me, particularly on Instagram, and realizing that it's kind of like 25 to 35 age range, and looking at how I can create something that's kind of like an elementary price to my work, because a lot of my work is kind of within the luxury price brackets. So I work with a lot of kind of galleries and quite high-end places. So I've been trying to offer something that's more affordable to, like the everyday kind of person. So yeah, I've been playing around with doing some like smaller pieces and kind of some mirrors, which have been going down really well. And the mirrors are all made from offcuts from other projects. So I try to keep everything that happens within certain projects and commissions, any kind of offcuts, then get turned into kind of mirrors or something else. So to try to keep that circularity within my studio.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. And so, because it's so flexible, the material that you work with, I imagine that you can be very flexible in terms of trends. This is very future focused, isn't it, what you do?
Yeah. I mean, I used to work within colour, material and finish and for trend companies, but the last 4 years, it's not something I kind of delve into anymore. Kind of, trends is something that's very, very far from kind of my work now. But, as I say, because there is the option to customize kind of colours and forms, if interior designers or anyone was working towards some kind of trends, then it could be tied into projects for sure.
I think that we're all moving away from part of this whole discussion tonight is how much this hyper consumerism is beginning to repel so many people, and particularly artists and creative people. I mean, like something that we can get into as well, I think, in a minute. But thank you very much, Charlotte. And I'll move on now to Beatrice, who's using a very, very traditional but process in a way, but you've completely reinvented it. I mean, it's quite striking and modern and beautiful. Do you want to talk a little bit more about what you're doing?
Yeah, so, well, I finished my MA at the Royal College in 2013, and I studied woven textiles. And then I started my own business sort of gradually from there, starting hand weaving, but I always knew I wanted to sell to shops. And so I then found a mill in Lancashire and started working with them to produce fabrics that I could sell wholesale. And so they start off with my hand drawings. So they're geometric designs. Often they look like they're slightly off, like the lines are a little bit off. So I wanted to create a hand-drawn quality to a production manufactured piece.
Yes, I think you've really done that, I have to say. They're lively, they all look completely individual.
That was the idea. So they kind of, I always loved hand weaving, and I think, because I use a jacquard loom at the mill I use, and I think it's sometimes the same with digital print. You can sometimes sort of take away the life that I think a hand woven might have. So I really wanted to try and take that forward to the jacquard weaving that I do.
Which means that you have actually woven the pattern into the material itself. It's not printed in any way.
No, it's all woven. And I I try to play around with traditional weaving as well. So often the capabilities of a jacquard loom means that I can use the structure of a weave and then create the design in the structure. It can be quite complex, but it's trying to sort of play with that whole the whole technique. And I use merino wool in the fabric, so they're super soft as well, and and predominantly a monochrome palette, as you can see most of my fabrics behind me. Yeah, and so I turn them into throws and cushions, and I'm just starting to try to do fabric by the meter as well. So yeah.
So there's sort of heirlooms of the future, if you like. And
Yeah.
what drew you to weaving in particular?
Well, that was a long time ago when I was studying for my BA at Chelsea College of Art. I think when you're studying, then you can sort of experience a whole lot of different type of textile techniques, and I just wanted to learn a real craft from scratch. You know, like when you produce a woven fabric, you're creating a fabric from a piece of yarn, and it's quite magical what you can create. And when you have the foundations of understanding how a fabric is manufactured, you can understand what you can change about that, you know. And so, you know, I could apply lots of my designs in other ways. They could be printed, or I could use them for other purposes, but I love weaving, especially because it has so much depth in the fabric, I think.
Just beautiful, and a lovely sort of non-toxic material, when so much of what's happening in terms of fabric that's being made is causing such an issue with the oceans and things. Even high-end materials can sometimes be involved in lots of toxicity, and using pure wool. Is it British wool? How do you source your materials?
It's actually Australian merino. And it's spun in Italy, so it's usually it's extra fine merino, which is usually used for like the high-end knitwear.
Yes.
And yeah, I've done a lot of research in the past trying to find British wool, but I've always wanted the softness of merino, which does come from Australia and New Zealand, really, like when you want to get that. But I'm still, you know, and it's actually probably the most expensive part of my product is the wool. So I don't scrimp on that part because of the quality that it creates, and the finished product, you can feel that in the merino. Now when I'm looking at other products that I might sort of take forward into the future, I'm looking at other sources. So potentially I could do like a British wool collection, but it would be more hardy because British wool is. So I'm always looking for other yarn and other fibers to work with.
So but they're extraordinarily beautiful, and I think you're part of this whole movement of the rise of craft and of new makers as well. Have you found that lockdown has changed that very much for you, or do you feel that craft is really changing? This is something I'm going to get into with Malika in a bit more depth, but well, as a maker.
I mean, the last 6 months for me has been quite different because I've been out of London. So, and I've before lockdown, I wasn't full-time in my business, and actually this last 6 months has given me like full amount of time to spend on my business, and I've been living by the sea. So actually, like, it's been completely different. And just the space, I think, you know, the fast-paced London life sometimes it's hard to sort of step back and sort of, and I felt very inspired, but in completely different ways. And and I've been sort of thinking about, because my mill shut for a little while as well, so I've been thinking about other products to make, and I've been doing other processes, like I've been doing some lino cutting and some lino, like printing, and trying to think of other products as well, which is it's quite a nice to sort of refocus, I guess, on the business and sort of step back and have a think about other things that I could be making as well. So yeah, that's been really nice.
Been swings and roundabouts, but some of the lockdown certainly been a time for creative people to have a moment to breathe, even if it's not been perfect. That certainly has. And so, in speaking about the rise of craft, well, I might move on to Malika now, you have been so deeply embedded in this world as a key journalist for decades now. How are you finding the response to craft at the moment in the time of COVID?
Well, I mean, obviously craft has been gaining momentum in a huge way over recent years. And during this time, of course, everyone's been hugely screen saturated. So everybody's been looking for things to do at home, and B, an antidote to their screens. So I think there's been a huge rise in sort of amateur making, and to get a bit statty on you, that's even a word, the government does these taking part surveys every year, and sort of crafts and so particularly textile crafts are always of all the arts high above painting, have the highest engagement rates. So, and over this period, they did a recent one during the lockdown period, and obviously it went through the roof. So it's growing and growing and growing. And obviously at the same time, people's love of buying craft, it's been a little interrupted by the slowdown in consumerism, if I can say the word. It's, yeah, I mean, craft is a sort of uniquely human expression, and in this over sort of automized world that we live in, it becomes all the more significant.
You also write a lot about craft that, you know, is really moving into that very rich world that's part art, really, not just craft. And very often in that part of the world, artists are talking about sustainability a lot as well. That's becoming a key focus of how the art or craft is made. The line, I think, is very blurred, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what we cover crosses the divide, really. I mean, we love beautifully made objects imbued with skill. They don't always have to have a really elaborate concept behind them, but yeah, I mean, a lot of what we cover does cross into the art world, and kind of craft, I think, it's very shaped by its context, whether that's the region it's made in or the society that it's born in, or the political issues at the time. It can kind of be a barometer of the times, and I think crafts can have really interesting things to say about that, and it can push for change and confront important issues, sustainability being a huge one for that. You know, people like Beatrice are really changing how people view waste, which is vital at this time.
Yes.
And there's a huge groundswell of that. There's so many makers looking at different waste streams and how we can repurpose them rather than use virgin materials.
Yes, absolutely. And the use of materials, you know, seems to inform a lot. And also wanting things that are beautiful and that last. I'm finding that's a real thread through a lot of what people are making. So Daylesford founder, for example, Lady Bamford, has launched Neela House now, specifically to protect indigo dyeing skills in India, because it's so much easier to dye something blue with material, and is about maintaining a skill base. And I think part of the rise of craft is people reskilling themselves as well.
Reskilling themselves, there's definitely a lot of attention going back into that, but also craft reminds us about value and about caring for objects. If an object is embedded with narrative or, you know, the story of the maker, then it becomes so much more significant, I think. Yeah, I mean, there's a huge rise in amateur making, which is absolutely amazing. There's also so many craft TV shows at the moment. One thing I find slightly frustrating about these TV shows, though, is that they belie the effort, the patience, the hours worth of skill that goes into being a craftsperson. It takes enormous dedication, and often, you know, in these TV shows, they hide the mistakes. So anyone thinks, I mean, it just slightly devalues what some people can do. They have in the West, we have this expression that it takes 10,000 hours to be an expert at anything.
Yes.
But in Japan, they take it a whole step further. They say you need 60,000 hours of practice to become a master craftsperson, and they have a special name for them. I think takumi, I think. Yeah, so learning a skill takes enormous dedication.
And you're in the middle of Craft Week, and
Yes.
it's been an extraordinary year. How are the makers going? We've spoken to two tonight, but has it been good for them, or is it been incredibly difficult for them?
I think for the most part, it's been incredibly difficult because a lot of people haven't had access to their studios, or they've had their supply chains interrupted, or they've created enormous bodies of work for exhibitions that never happened. So I think for a lot of people, it has been really hard. I mean, we have spoken to some people and we featured some people in our latest issue that use this, managed to find huge positives from this time. Yeah. But yeah, for the most part, and particularly for the graduates, it's been incredibly tough because obviously they haven't had their graduate shows. They weren't able to finish their work. They didn't have studio time. But on the plus side, things like the Artist Support Pledge has emerged, which I don't know if you're familiar. I mean, most people probably...
Tell me a little bit more about that, Malika.
So the Artist Support Pledge was set up by Matthew Burrows, and it started off as it's an Instagram hashtag, and he invited makers and artists to sell pieces of their work via the hashtag for under £200. And I think it's when they sold something like 5 pieces, they are then meant to reinvest in someone else's work. So it's a sort of self-supporting chain, but it's done phenomenally well. And I have become slightly addicted to buying things on the support pledge, and I urge everyone else to in this difficult time and for Christmas, over Christmas.
Yeah, amazing. What's the hashtag again, Malika?
Artists Support Pledge.
Artist Support Pledge. Just writing that down. That sounds like exactly the kind of really creative, almost circular economy that can come about when we're linked up. I mean, it brings us nicely into the idea of the future, where the future lies. I mean, if I start with you, Malika, but everybody's got a role in this, because I know that Rita has taken some of her interior design knowledge into an online course. But Malika, where do you see the future?
That's a very sort of open-ended question.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously one of the biggest issues today is the waste crisis, and the fact that sort of, I think it's 2/3 of the world's, we're plucking, 2/3 of the world's resources that we sort of, excavate from the world, get thrown into landfill, and that has to end. So we need a sort of cultural shift away from newness, and we need the social anthropologist, I think it's called Mary Douglas, came up with this great expression that dirt is just matter out of place. So we need people like Beatrice to show us what can be done with waste to change it. But then there also needs to be, business incentives to reusing things. We need to become a sort of society of menders. We need to take better care of our objects and learn how to mend them when they break.
Yes.
And that takes a shift, and it's happening in the fashion world now. Lots of fashion brands are now offering repairs as part of their kind of services, and even Selfridges has offers a repair station. But there's such a cultural shift that needs to happen. Yeah. But then there's a huge excitement there because Beatrice's work is a really good example of the extraordinary things we can do.
That's right. And that whole idea that, in fact, if we stop being so disposable, we end up with more beautiful things.
Yeah, and consumerism should be a sort of vote for what we want, the sort of future that we want.
Yeah. Yeah. And for the rest of you, so Rita, how do you see the future?
Oh God.
Sorry, this is a wild question. I mean,
I know it's quite broad, but I think that, well, I would hope that I don't know that we are going to stop the mass, the shop, those big label companies that are making so much and people are buying so much. I mean, I suppose the only way to do it is through education and for it to become a thing that we collectively disagree with and disapprove of, which I think would be a very good thing. Because I also think those factories that are producing it, the health and safety in them are so bad, and people are very, you know, for all sorts of reasons it's not good. And I wonder when we are going to stop with the, you know, developers doing spec houses and putting in endless marble bathrooms and marble kitchens that the people buy them, they're all absolutely pulled out, and the decorator comes in and the architect, and it's all completely redone.
Yes.
And it's relatively new that, you know, I don't think that at the beginning of the 20th century people were buying a new house and ripping the kitchen out and ripping bathrooms out. There was a certain amount of living with what was there and putting a new wallpaper up and painting things and doing things that way. And I think we've become very spoiled, you know, that we need to dig 18 levels to get 5 basements and, you know, house.
Yes.
You know, it's just so I hope that will change.
Yeah. And what
I don't know that I can.
So you think mainly the mass production is perhaps one of the big barriers that we face in terms of improving our sustainability, the competition from cheaper factories?
So. I think that would be where it is, and you know, when you're making something for it's very expensive. So if you're making it well, you know, if you're making something well with a craftsman, to make a wardrobe is expensive. The sort of wardrobe that would come out and be sold versus the MDF thing that'll be put in and come out, that's not being mass produced. But you know, I was interviewing somebody today who had come from a design, and she said, I really like that you work with antiques, and it makes the place much more unique. And she was working for somebody who they made all of the furniture bespoke. Now, when that's happening, I believe, they did it because there was a much better margin in it. And it's quicker, you're not having to find all this stuff. But also that is disposable furniture. In 5 years' time, that piece of furniture is worth nothing. And this person is probably their 5th house. You know, it's not the things they're going to pass on. I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I'm coming up with anything that's got a solution. So apparatus, stop talking. But I find all of that a bit of a muddle, and I don't really like it. And I think new things can be beautiful. And I think actually, funnily enough, in craft, it's not fashionable. So those things that are being made, I think, will sustain, because they'll be the things that will end up in antique shops rather than, hopefully on the.
And I think that's something that.
And antiques go through fashions too. You know, there's definitely fashions in antiques for sure.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
everything is a cycle.
Yeah, Malika, you were going to say something.
I was just going to interject that I think I've been saying the wrong name. I think I've been talking about Beatrice using waste, and it's not. It's shocking. So I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
That's okay. But Beatrice, we've been taking your name in vain, but you're definitely making things that if somebody picks them up, they'll be thinking, if I have something in my home from this, it will last for generations. Is that a more unusual way of thinking about things in the modern world, do you think?
I've always struggled with the idea of trends a little bit, and I always have wanted to try and design kind of a timeless piece, I guess. So that's the ideal, that my fabrics could be exist 20, 50 years ago, but also are current, and but then obviously we are all like even subconsciously trends drive all of us, so I don't think we can ignore them. It's just interesting how I don't know how what the future is, because I think it could work at a slower pace, definitely. I think the speed of trends is just, especially in the fashion industry, is just kind of crazy.
Yes, absolutely.
It's much worse, the fashion industry, than decorating, because I think just because you can't change your house that often, it'd be exhausting. But I'm also always amazed by how appalled people are by the cost of, say, a lampshade, when they would spend that on a pair of shoes without batting an eyelid, and the shoes would be redundant in a year's time quite easily, and the lampshade would still trot on for another 10 years probably, and you'd be seeing it every day.
Yes, and interacting with it every day. I mean, Charlotte, I know
they don't get scuffed to the same degree either.
Yeah, that's right. Depending on what your home life's like.
Yeah, exactly.
But Charlotte, how do you see the future? Do you think that the movement for sustainability is growing?
Yeah, I think the future is very exciting. I think sustainability is a huge topic that was going to take everybody working collectively to make a change, and I think change will happen. However, it might not be something that we, a change to a full circular economy instead of take, make, replace, might not be something that we see in our lifetime. However, all of us working, doing our part individually, will come together and make a change on a much bigger scale. And I think what I'm quite interested in is looking at how to get the topic and the conversation of circular economy kind of talked about amongst the mass, and not just kind of elitist groups who kind of have the privilege of being able to talk about buying crafted items or more expensive pieces or luxury pieces, but how we can bring kind of the idea of sustainability and reusing things and buying things that aren't mass produced into the the everyday person's life. I think we have it. It's just something, I think, the likes of David Attenborough now doing broadcasts about the crisis that we're in, and he recently joined Instagram and did a broadcast there. That's, I think, quite an amazing thing, how he's reaching that platform that's now being broadcast to so many people, and more people are learning about it, and more people want to know how they can do their bits. And I think, I hope my work is an example to people of how they can look into these kind of hidden waste streams, and how they can kind of evaluate what raw materials are, and how new materials can be used within craft. I think people's mindsets can definitely be changed. It's just helping them change them. And kind of something someone mentioned earlier about kind of people's budgets, that allow people to, the more money you have, maybe the more you can think about kind of buying more higher end or luxury pieces or sustainable pieces. I have a lot of kind of brands that come to me and say, how can we want to work sustainable materials, but they have a really short time frame and a low budget. And I say it's just not possible, unfortunately. This is a change that needs to happen over time. It's not something that can happen overnight or be installed in a project in 2 weeks. You've got to kind of change, this can be in 6 months' time. You've got to slowly introduce it into your business model, as opposed to just adding it last minute.
And as people make things, maybe they become more accessible. If we had a culture that was that valued craft, and maybe that would reduce barriers to some of the makers.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the Artist Support Pledge was a great example of making it more accessible to people, because one, it was kind of on digital platform that could be seen by so many people instead of just being in galleries or stores. So I think firstly the fact that it's digital and anybody can access that work, and the fact that it was all the objects were under £200, so it's much more accessible for people to be able to buy into. So yeah.
And what if people wanted to find more sustainable pieces? I mean, and this is a question for everybody. I mean, maybe Malika as well. But Charlotte, if somebody is interested in sustainable pieces or wants to ensure that pieces are responsibly sourced, how do they go about that?
Well, there's kind of for the likes of kind of interior designers or architects, if they're looking at things from a material level, there's a lot of artist libraries kind of online. You can type in material libraries online and a lot will come up. So it's like material library, material connection. And then there's also material libraries in London where you can go and source materials and you can learn about the materials whilst you're there, and it'll have kind of like breakdowns of how they've been made and applications that can be used. And then I think there's also kind of lots of books now, particularly one that's just come out called Wasted. It's When Trash Becomes Treasure, and that features designers and projects and companies that are all working with kind of waste materials. So yeah, I think there's lots out there. It just takes a bit of time and research, and if you're prepared to put, I think, the time and the energy and the research in, then it's quite easy to find. It's out there. Yeah,
I think that we're potentially living in this area where if you want to buy food from sustainable sources, you have to do your homework. If you want to buy fashion from sustainable sources, like, it's not been made easy to any of us just yet, but maybe in 15, 20 years it will be easier.
Yeah, and I think it is we're already seeing signs of it becoming easier. I think, is it John Lewis, who they have within their labels, if things are made from a certain type of material, that's there for people to be able to see. And lots of shops, I think I just saw like Toast and COS, where they're now offering like a take back, so you can take in your old clothes and then take back a piece that's been put on the rail by somebody else.
Funny enough, I think that Soak and Sleep, sorry to interrupt, are doing that with their pillows. You can, they're recycling the down, which is amazing. Maybe the White Company is doing it. One of those big companies is it's mad not to recycle down. I mean,
yes,
feather.
Yeah, there's a lot going into landfill that's incredibly useful. You know, and Malika, do you have any advice if somebody's interested in finding more sustainable?
We've got a shameless plug. Buy Crafts magazine.
Yes.
Because we spotlight those, you know, sustainability is obviously a huge concern, and so, you know, it's a thread that runs throughout the magazine and will always be so. All
right, so what I'd like to do now in the last 5 minutes that we've got left is if we could go to any questions that anybody in the audience has got. Hopefully you'll be typing them into me. So
I have another, there's the sustainable department stores just opened this week. If you're in London, till like the 15th of October, it's on Bethnal Green Road. I haven't been yet, but I've been to some of the pop-ups they've done before, and they're sort of lots of different brands that are brought together, clothing, homeware, and really lovely pieces. And
fantastic. And Rita, I think you, by the sounds of things, you use a lot of relationships with people, with marketeers and things to find, because inevitably everything antique that you use means it's not a new factory thing. You become part of that.
You found it, you know, it's found.
Yes.
And that's quite laborious. But I suppose also it's what I love that. I love that finding. But it is interesting with clients because, you know, sometimes they'll go, well, we don't really need that yet, and I'm not sure, maybe we'll find something better. And you're like, okay. And so, you know, you leave it, and then they're like, oh, that thing you saw, and you're like, well, it's gone.
Yes,
that's gone. You know, we'll have to find something different now. So there's also that, which is exciting too is you've got to grab it when you see it. Yes. And it's interesting, I think maybe Charlotte was saying about the research, you know, it is a bit more time consuming, but I think it's worth it. I mean, it is irresistible just to go on and click when you need something as well. Click away and it's delivered, you know, and there's your table.
Yeah.
Not necessarily so nice when it arrives.
That's the thing, isn't it? I think if you, because the other day I wanted some picture frames and I very nearly went onto IKEA and I stopped myself and closed it down. And there's a guy in my workshop that makes frames, and instead asked him, obviously for a much higher price, however, I will wait a month and save up to be able to afford these frames. Yeah. And I'm sure I'll be much happier with them. And
you won't want to change them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I think a lot of the making and mending just does change things. I mean, you end up with things that you want to keep. You know, I've got a couple of things that I know are going to go on to the next generation. I don't have a lot, but they're beautiful and they please me every time I use them. And
I bet, Rhea, there's many more things than that. I bet there's a ton of stuff. And funny enough, I think a lot of it is in the ordinary. It's not just the best thing that gets handed on. It's also in the quite ordinary stuff. And actually, I think for children and grandchildren, it's in the ordinary stuff that you lurk. You know, it's in that wooden spoon that you used all the time, that you are. And that's much more exciting in many ways than the most valuable thing in the house, you know. There's also, just in terms of decorating, weirdly, one of the things that I'm always encouraging people to really spend as much as they can is on a sofa. You know, to buy a cheap sofa is not cheap. A cheap sofa might be £1,500. So
it's going to last you
a lot of money, £1,500, to buy a sofa that ultimately down the road you're going to want to change.
Yes, because they're out.
And you can't get rid of them. So I think those big pieces also, it's much better to go as good as you can with a view to really keeping it. And funny enough, sofas are things that I've inherited and intend to pass on. Those are big things that I think are good to.
Yes, absolutely. We've got a question, which is, this time has got us all back to craft and using our hands again. Any tips for beginners on how to learn a craft remotely? So that's a question open to anybody.
There is a company called Yodimo that have really good craft courses. It's worth looking online there.
Yodimo.
Yeah. And I mean, you can find you can teach yourself anything via YouTube at this time. Are we talking digitally here?
Yes, yeah,
yes,
remotely. So
yeah. Then if you want to learn to mend, there are lots of places that are teaching that digitally as well. There's an artist called Celia Pym who she's her works are kind of very conceptual, but her work is chiefly about mending. And she does sort of mending workshops where it's all about visible mending, and about kind of someone's asking the spelling. I think it's Yodomo, I think, but I might be wrong. Sorry, Google it.
You Google that and craft, and we've got, if you don't mind just running just 2 minutes over, we've got such a good question from Juliet. How do we address sustainability in relation to lowering carbon emissions, e.g. shopping locally, buying British? What does your panel think about this?
I think she's given two great examples there, shopping locally and buying British, and also just, I think, tracking consumer habits. You know, there's a lot of control we can take as individuals, you know, if it's eating less meat, eating less dairy, buying less, or, you know, buying into quality instead of quantity. I think, yeah, there's some easy examples of how we can do that. It's being more aware, I think, of what we're doing and how we're spending.
Yeah, I think also get to know your local artists and makers, go to craft fairs, because they'll most likely be using local materials.
Yeah.
I mean, not exclusively, but highly likely to.
Yeah.
So that's a good place to start.
We're actually hopefully, fingers crossed, organising an open workshop for Christmas and a Christmas market. So there's 15 makers in my workshop, and then we might be opening up to some external makers. And the idea is to have a localised event where people can buy kind of things that have been crafted by local makers instead of having to potentially buy online or go shopping. So yeah, we're hopefully doing that. So keep eyes peeled.
There's usually quite a lot of those around the country, wouldn't you say, Malika? Yeah. So keep your eye out or Google that, because you may well find that local craftspeople in your area are trying to reach you too. And maybe there'll be local potters, or I think probably, if I can be bold enough to steal the last line, and I'm the panelist, so I'm allowed. I mean, guys, I think the minute that we decide to have possessions that mean something to us, that automatically takes us into the realm of being interested in craftspeople, in artists and sustainability, that we make a promise to ourselves not to keep buying anonymous things. Everything from an anonymous sofa to an anonymous frame to, you know, an anonymous piece of clothing. We decide to buy something that's got a bit of a story and meaningfulness. We've done, I think, a very good beginning with food, and seeing it also being part of craft is really heartwarming. I feel like you guys are the future. So thank you all very, very much for tonight, and thank you all for joining us. And I wish you a happy and healthy autumn. And thanks everybody, and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.